and welcome to the Ignorance Project. Today, I'm very excited about having a familiar face with us. Hello, Dr. Burton.
Hey, what's up?
So just to start, I want to give a little bit of background on the topic for today, or really the why behind why I want to discuss the topic for today. I went to Kenya about a month ago. And I was in pure bliss and not paying attention to anything at all. And then I came back and I saw all this news about Israel and Palestine. And I felt very much out of the loop, like I had no clue what was going on. So after, I'm ashamed to say, a couple of weeks, I started realizing that a lot of people were posting. And I'm like, what's going on? And I don't know what to make of anything, right? So I had a discussion with you and I said, do you know anyone that could that I could talk to on the Ignorance Project about what's happening between Israel and Palestine and everything in Gaza and just everything right now? And you've been having these discussions apparently.
Yeah, for years actually. But most recently, I've done a couple podcasts. A group out in California asked me to do a podcast. A church organization just did one for them last week. Was on WRD. That's the oldest Black talk radio on the Eastern Seaboard. So I was with them a couple weeks ago. Of course, my regular show that's on WJOU, What's Going On with Kenny Anderson, and doing something tomorrow. And yeah, so I've been doing quite a few interviews on this topic.
Okay, so I wanted to start by just explaining the why, because I have you on my show as an expert in a lot of things, but that's because you're qualified to be an expert.
Okay.
I mean, I'm impressed by you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Just accept it. Just receive it.
Well, thank you.
So thank you once for being a guest on the Ignorance Project again.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
All right. So I want to get that out the way before we start our discussion.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm just going to start by just being very transparent. I made a post earlier this week on my page saying I really kind of wrestled with the idea of admitting how much I do not understand about this topic. But at the end of the day, the Ignorance Project is a space where we can all come and learn more information, including myself. So sometimes I have conversations about things that I really don't know about because I want to know more too.
Yes, I understand.
This is one of those times. Okay. So just to start, can you give us a brief overview on the history of Israel and Palestine and everything that's going on right now?
Okay, there's a short version and there's a long version.
Give us a short version.
But the reason why I say actually, in order to understand the history, you really do need to know the long version. It doesn't have to take long to tell the truth, but it's all about land. And so I like to look at it as an issue of people, an issue of place as in location, and then issue of politics.
Okay.
All right. And of course, religion. So, place, people, politics, a nice P's, but I don't have a P for religion. All right. And so all of those come into play. And so when it comes to the whole idea of land, we find that many people, when they look at this, particularly through religious eyes, basically say, oh, okay, that's where the Jews are from, in a sense, right? And so from those lens, people basically say, well, that's the Jews' home, and so the Jews belong there, and they can do what they want. The Palestinians are invaders, whatever you know. But it's really not that simple. And so, from a place perspective, we see at least what we know about the history of that area. In the scholarly books, they refer to it as the ancient Near East. If you've gone like a few thousand years, I refer to it in my writings as Afro-Asia or Hamitic Africa. And I do that based upon how I understand the location of certain geographical territories based on Genesis chapter 10 in the Bible. Okay, and I'm not the only one. Kane Hopefelder, who is one of the fathers, if I could use that term, of African American biblical hermeneutics. That's a term that he used, and a number of others. They refer to that as either Hamitic Africa or Afro-Asia. And so that region over there, historically, was a region that was assigned to one of Ham's sons. And of course, from a biblical perspective, Ham is the father of people, most of whom settled in Africa. And the only one of his children who doesn't have a modern counterpart to the African continent would be Canaan, because the area of Canaan, who was a son of Ham, is today called the Middle East, and that includes this land over here. That's, this is the hotspot. That's the conflict is taking place. And so when we look at this region, that we call Palestine, Israel, it's gone by different names over the years. And so for those who read the Bible, this would be the area where the Canaanites were. Okay. And it was also the area where the Philistines were. Now, how that's interesting and important is because the word Palestine is actually a Latin term for the Hebrew word Philistine. Okay. All right. And so that's how that sort of comes into play. So the Philistines and the Canaanites were actually there before the Israelites, but the Israelites believed that God gave them that territory.
Interesting.
And, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And so if you look at it historically, and look at it again through the lens of biblical history, and there are people who question biblical history. For instance, there's an interesting book that came out recently by a Jewish scholar, Shlomo Sand. He's a historian. I think he's at the University of Tel Aviv. But he basically buys into a theory that there was no such person as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that the Israelites were basically rebellious Canaanites, in a sense, who invented a history for themselves. I personally don't believe that, but that is a scholarly opinion, that the whole notion of a promised land is something that people made up to basically, and so the long history, again, is we have the land of Canaan. People were living there. The Israelites, whether we believe the biblical account, and they came from actually a different place, from Haran around Syria, then in Egypt for a while, and then settled over there. But even with that narrative, there were people there before. Okay. But with the Israelites, and again, we're still talking about land, with the Israelites, that location became known as Israel about roughly about maybe 12 to 1500 BC. Okay. And the kingdom of Israel, from the biblical evidence, split into two. In the north, we have 10 kingdoms which kept the name Israel. In the south, we have the two kingdoms that embrace the name Judah, from the tribe of Judah. The kingdom that had the name Israel, they were defeated by the Assyrians in 722 BCE, and we just left that southern kingdom of Judah. The Judeans, those of Judah, that's where we get the word Jews.
Okay. I'm going to pause you for a second. Because when I said I wanted to have this discussion with you, I also posted on my page and I asked people, what are your questions about this whole situation, right? So I have a few questions I'm going to ask throughout our discussion. Some of them are from me, some of them are from other people, okay? But you're talking a lot about the biblical perspective about this. So I think that's a good time to interject. And I had someone ask about Israel, and how a lot of people see Israel as the biblical chosen people.
Yes.
Right. And I think you're kind of starting to talk about that right now.
Yes.
So how is this understood and misunderstood when we hear people say that?
Okay, so let me continue the journey, right? Okay. And so we're at 722. Assyrians conquer the Israelites. So there is no longer any kingdom of Israel. From the year 722 BCE to the year 1948, there is no place on this earth, no nation that is called Israel.
And I just want to pause again and just talk about your credentials for talking about this topic, because you have a PhD in New Testament theology.
Right. Yeah. In religious and theological studies, emphasis in New Testament, published author. And in fact, one of my books, A Blessing of Africa, the Bible and African Christianity, I have a whole section on, not whole section. Actually, there are several sections where I deal with the history of this region.
Which is how you're qualified to talk about this, and how you've been doing research about this for years.
For decades.
For decades. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, keep going.
Right. Yeah. So again, so as we look at this whole notion of Israel again, being a place, a geographical place, in the year 722, that ceased when the Assyrians basically conquered the Israelites, dispersed them to different places. We have the southern kingdom left, the kingdom of Judah. That's where we get the word Jews. All right. And again, as we look at the history of that region, the Jews, of course, they were conquered by the Babylonians in captivity for a while. After the period of captivity, kind of rebuilt, but even as they rebuilt, they were still under other people's colonization. Okay. And I didn't want the wording to come out like that, but it did, and I hopefully your listeners understand. So that's how it came around. So they're being colonized by others. After the Babylonians was the Persians, and then the Greeks, the Alexander the Great, etc. And of course, I'm not going to go into the weeds and go into the Potomacs and the Seleucids, what have you. But then after a while, there was a rebellion. Mattathias, he was a high priest. He rebelled along with his sons, Yehuda. Yehuda was known as the Hammerer, Judah's Maccabeus. That's a Maccabean revolt. So we now have the Hasmonean dynasty. But the Hasmonean dynasty, for a brief while, the Jewish people are no longer called Israel. The Jewish people are an independent nation. But then what happens during this time, they make alliances with others. Romans come to power. Romans end the Hasmonean dynasty, and they have proxy kings. And this is where the notion of people come in, because one of the kings was Herod. And those who read the Bible would say, okay, Herod, yeah, he's the king of the Jews. But what they don't know is that Herod, the king of the Jews, was an Idumean. Okay. And so the Idumeans, they were a kingdom that was annexed into Judea under the Hasmonean dynasty, under the conquest. All right. And again, we can talk about this later. I guess some questions will give me a chance to talk a little bit more about that. But again, so the Jews, they're basically a colonized entity again, happened during up until the time of Jesus. They're under Roman occupation. After Jesus, about 66, there was a rebellion in that area. The Jewish wars of 66 to 73. That's when the Romans, they basically destroyed the temple. All right. And that's the third temple that was actually built in that spot. And so they destroyed that temple. And after they destroyed that temple, they kind of calmed things down a bit to the year 73. Then there was another rebellion in the year 132, a gentleman called Simon Bar Kokhba or Simon Bar Kokhba. There was another rebellion in 132 to 135. And
sorry, these rebellions are between what is now known as Israel and Palestine.
No. We're talking about just the Jews right now. Okay. The Jews rebellion against the Romans. All right. After the end of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, the Romans said, we're going to change the name of this province, which was called Judea after the Jews, and they renamed it Palestinia, initially Syria, Palestinia, or Palestine. All right. And later it was just purely Palestine. And they did that because Palestine is I said Palestine, but Palestina is the Latin translation of Philistine. And it was basically them saying, okay, we're going to have the Philistines beat you. All right. And so they renamed that area. It was kind of an assault. Okay. And so it was Palestine for a while. But then over the years, there were different names assigned to it until we get to the era of the Ottoman Empire. And we see a number of literature where it's referred to as Palestine, but towards the end of the Ottoman Empire, when the British actually were given reign over that region too. Those horrible British, and I can say that because I am British. Those horrible British given reign over that region, and of course, it's known in that era as Palestine. And so, if you look at coinage in the early 1900s, this is Palestine.
Okay.
This is Palestine. And so, in 1947, the United Nations basically said, okay, the Jews can have their own homeland, and they divided Palestine into Israel and Palestine. So they created a new state, and that state was Israel.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the long and the short of it, right? But we're just talking again about land. And so this land that was Philistia and Canaan had different names over the years. And in the 20th century, early 20th century, was known as Palestine. And it wasn't until the creation of the state of Israel that we see the territory that was known as Palestine for a number of decades. Notice I didn't say centuries because the name changed over the years. But this territory was known as Palestine and Israel. Now, that's place. But the issue now comes with people. Okay, because so who are these people?
Yeah, because what I'm hearing you say now, I think that was a good overview of the history on how we got to where we are now. But in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, so there's still Israel, and the people there are, I'm assuming, Jewish, and then there's Palestine, and the people there are Palestinian.
Okay, all right. So we talk about people, and language is dangerous. Language is propaganda. Language is propaganda. All right. I mentioned that I'm British. I'm British because I was born in England, but I'm also American because I have American citizenship. Right. And so I am British and I'm American. And so
you're Jamaican.
And I'm Jamaican, right? And so to be a Palestinian really means one who is born in Palestine. Okay. And so those who held the appellation Palestinian in the early 20th century were Jews, Muslims, Christians, anyone who was from Palestine. Anyone who was from Palestine, anyone who was from that region was a Palestinian. Okay, that's a nationality. It's not an ethnicity, it's a nationality. So if you lived in that region, you were a Palestinian. If there was no state of Israel and you had even the same situation that we had now, we'd probably call it a civil war. All right, because anyone in that territory would be a Palestinian. However, what complicates issues more has to do with another reality, with another history, and that's the history of the Jewish people, particularly those who predominate in current Israeli politics. All right. And so now we have to go from that region and move west to Europe. Okay. And so when we look at the people now who control things in that region, we're not looking at people whose ancestors, at least any recent ancestry or any traceable ancestry, are actually from that region. Okay. We're looking at the reality that Judaism, like Christianity, like Islam, is a missionary religion. In other words, there are people who become Jews, who become Christians, who become Muslims. All right. And so when we look at Judaism, a lot of people want to make it out to be an ethnicity. Are there people who descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Absolutely. Who are they? We don't know. We don't know. But we do know that at least by the time of Jesus, there was a large, what we call Jewish diaspora. So there were Jews, of course, who lived in Judea. The actual center of Jewish intellectual learning was Egypt. Okay, so there was a huge Jewish population in Egypt and North Africa. For those who read the Bible, looking at Acts chapter 2, the day of Pentecost, you will see that there were Jews from all over the world who were there. And these Jews, and it says, Jews and proselytes. A proselyte is one who was baptized into Judaism. And you were only a proselyte for that first thing. Once you're baptized, your children are going to be Jews, and so your children are not going to be proselytes. So if you're baptized as a Jew, all right, you join Judaism. People may refer to you as a proselyte, one who has entered in, but your children are not referred that way. And so again, this idea of Jewish ethnicity is a misnomer. Mm-hmm. It's a huge misnomer. But the challenge is now that those Jews, particularly who settled in Europe, and we see a lot of evidence on this, particularly at the end of the first millennium, going into the second millennium, there was a whole lot of Jewish persecution. And so under Edward the Confessor in England, Jews were expelled. Philip the Fair in France, Jews were expelled. Going to the 15th century, Ferdinand Isabel, going to the Inquisitions in Portugal and Spain. And in fact, that's when a lot of Jews went to the Caribbean during that time.
Okay.
Because and a lot of them pretended to be Catholics because convert or die. And so but we have this history of oppression in Europe because of the faith that they professed. And we see the same thing happening with Catholics and Protestants. Okay, but especially with Jews, being accused of being Christ killers and the whole nine. And so all this is taking place in Europe. We read about the pogroms in Poland, and of course, everything culminated with the Holocaust, with the horrible Holocaust. Okay, and that was all done again in the name of Christianity. Okay.
So I know I saw Ta-Nehisi Coates being interviewed about being in Palestine, and one of the things that he mentioned in his interview was just kind of the ability to compare being Palestinian to being Black.
Yeah.
And hold on before you go, because I have a question. It's going to make sense in a second, right? Being able to compare that, right? And he talks about how when he would enter certain spaces, he'd be asked if he was a Christian. And depending on his answer, he was either denied, or not that he was denied, because he's I believe he's atheist or agnostic. But had his answer been yes, I believe he was saying that he would have been denied entry, right? So I'm pausing there because I'm really trying to understand if he's in a space where there are Jewish people that are in control. Is being a Christian a negative thing?
Not necessarily. Okay. Not necessarily at all.
Okay.
And again, I say this cautiously because everything is complicated.
Yeah.
Not only relationship statuses are complicated, right? I mean, everything is complicated. Yeah. And so the reason why I spoke about that history has to do with the reality of the reason for the state of Israel in the first place. The state of Israel was formed out of a collective guilt of Europeans basically saying, hey, because of our apathy over the years, our indifference, and our outright violence, okay, we created Hitler. We created Hitler. Something needs to be done for these Jewish people, right? But what they decided to do for the Jewish people was to put them or to establish a land from somewhere that was already occupied by a people. Okay, and that was Palestine. And remember, it's occupied by Jewish people, Christian people, and Muslim people. All right, and I'm sure there were some atheists there too, but those were the three main religions in that region. Jews were in the minority. Okay. Jews were in the vast minority. Okay. And so when we look at that region, of course, we see there's a sort of a longing and nostalgia from those Jews who are saying, okay, why are we hated so much in this hemisphere? We need somewhere. We need somewhere. And so we see now the foundations of an ideology called Zionism. You probably heard of Zionism. So Zionism was actually the brainchild of a secular Jew. Could have been an atheist, agnostic. His name was Theodor Herzl. And he basically says, Jews, we need a homeland. We need a homeland. And so the British, of course, because, the British are bullies and have everything. Yeah. And again, I can say that because I am British. And so the British basically said, okay, you want a homeland? We own Uganda. Seriously. So we're going to carve out a piece of Uganda. You go over there and say, no, we don't want Uganda. So then they said, all right, Argentina. Let's make a deal for you guys to go to Argentina. And they were like, we don't want to go to Argentina. Right. And so the Zionists basically said, okay, it has to be Israel, Israel or bust. Right. And so particularly during the First World War, another interesting name for those who are listening, look up Chaim Weizmann.
Yes.
Chaim Weizmann.
I'll post it.
Yeah. Chaim, I think, Weissman. And he was a scientist who helped to develop biological weapons. And that was very helpful for the British, to beat the German in World War I. Was that 1940 to 1919? Whatever you. But in 1917, the British Foreign Secretary, his name is Balfour, forgetting his first name right now, but he basically said, okay, we're going to establish Palestine as a homeland for the Jewish people.
Okay.
And that's known as the Balfour Declaration. And after that declaration was made, within the next decade or so, you see this huge influx of Jews come to the area, over 60,000. And in fact, by the end of the Second World War, like an extra 400,000 Jews just kind of move into that region. Now, of course, they move into that region. The Ottomans are no longer in control. The Ottomans were Muslims. The British are claiming ownership over this thing. But of course, there's the indigenous people, right? And so we have the United Nations, going back to the United Nations, basically saying, okay, we need to create a nation here. And they decide that they're going to displace Palestinians so they can create a new nation for those who had been oppressed for years. And, we cannot deny the fact they've been oppressed, but this is how the United Nations is remedying this. Now, think about the year now. The year is 1947. Who are the influential voices of the United Nations? We're talking France. We're talking England. We're talking the United States. What's happened in the United States in 1947? That's the height of Jim Crow. What's happening with England at that time? England claims to own half the world, the same with France, etc. Right? And so they have no problem saying we're going to displace people to give these people a homeland. They have no problem doing that because that's their mindset. It's a sense of white supremacy, right? This is their mindset. We have the power. This is what we're going to do. What's interesting when you see that vote, the Arab nations that were a part of the United Nations were like, no, this can't be. Egypt, the neighbor, like, no, it can't be. Ethiopia had a vote also. Can't be. Liberia had a vote. Can't be. Most African nations didn't have a vote. The reason why is because England claimed to own them and France claimed to own them. Remember 1947, before independence. So they didn't have a seat at the table. Wow. Only independent nations have a seat at the table, right? And so it was easy for a United Nations that was controlled by those who were enforcing apartheid and segregation in their own lands to say, okay, let's create a nation for a people, right? Again, I'm not minimizing what Jews were experiencing around the world because I spoke about Europe. I could also spoke about Ethiopia. In the 1970s, the Israeli Air Force did a couple rescue attempts. That's not the right word, but they evacuated a number of falasha. There's Ethiopian Jews, right? Evacuated a number of falasha from Ethiopia, took them into Israel. The reason why is because the Tewahedo Church, right? That's the Christian church in Ethiopia were persecuting the Jews. Okay? This was the Christian persecution of Jews. Right? Now, there's a whole story of that because a bunch of the Ethiopian women that they took to Israel, and this is something that anyone can research, they had them sterilized.
Mm-hmm. I've heard about that.
They sterilized them, right? Because they didn't want, African kids running around. Okay. And so, but again, so I don't want to minimize what's taken place in the Jewish world.
And is that why there are a lot of, I hope I'm saying this right, Eritreans?
No, Eritreans.
Thank you, that are Jewish?
Yeah. Well, Eritreans, because, where the falasha were wasn't necessarily Eritrean, but there are a number of Ethiopians, Eritreans, because remember, I mean, that's a complicated story too.
Okay, that's another.
And you basically have to go back to the Battle of Adwa in 1896. I mean, that's a whole other story there. All right, but yes, you do have a number of Eritreans essentially there, and of course, when you look at the Tewahedo Church in Ethiopia too, and interestingly, Tewahedo Church and the Tewahedo Church, when the Eritreans became independent, they kind of dropped a couple of letters out of the name, but it's the same church. It's the same church, but they're very historically very Judaic in their practice. They observe the Sabbath. They don't eat pork and different things, Okay. Right. Yeah. And so that's part of it. So their religion is very, Jewish in a sense. And,
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go on that tangent. Okay. So I think I'm starting to understand why it feels like a lot of Black Americans empathize with Palestinians. Because what I'm hearing you say is there are these two entities. The United Nations said, here you go. This is your home now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But the problem is I'm in a house right now that I paid for, that I own. And you're coming into my house and you're giving my master bedroom away.
Yes. Yes, not just the master bedroom, giving away everything and saying live in the bathroom.
Yeah,
I mean literally that's what it is.
Wow.
And I'm glad you took the African American context into this because again, our memories are very short, are very very short. So if you want to look at historically some of our, I don't know what Martin Luther King said about it, but I believe that he would have been like the others, like Malcolm X, Nelson Mandela, Stokely Carmichael, etc. They all recognized what was going on. Even Jimmy Carter. I mean, Jimmy Carter is not a Black hero, but he recognized what was going on. And so his book, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. He understood apartheid when he saw it. That is there was no two ways about it. There is no two ways about it. And I know there are people who are saying, well, this is their land, ancestral land. No, it's not. It is not. It's whose ancestral land is it? If we talk about ancestral land and we talk about people, it's the people who have been on that land. Okay. And we can't look at one's religious affiliation as their genealogy. That's two different things. All right. And so when we look at the Palestinians, and as I told you earlier, Palestinians in the early 20th century were Jews, Muslims, or Christians. Right? Okay. But then we look at the reality that Islam has only been about, for about 1,400 years. It's 722, right? 622, sorry. Right? So it hasn't been around for long. And so those people who were there that we call Palestinians because they lived there, not because of their religion or anything else, were something else before they became Muslim. All right. And according to sources, when the Muslims, I believe it was the Mamluks, came into that area, and we see the mass conversion, not only there, but in other areas in North Africa, when they came into that area, about 85% of the people were Christian and 15% were Jewish, right? And then, of course, we see this huge conversion to Islam. Right? But remember, they were Christian and Jewish before. And before because remember, Christianity doesn't come out till the 1st century. And so before they were Christian, they were something else. And so some of these are the same people ancestrally who are changing religion. And even if we were to go back to the times of ancient Israel. Remember, ancient Israel ceased to be in the year 722 BCE, right? If you go back to that time, we know that Joseph, all right, according to the Bible, his married to Asenath, an Egyptian, the daughter of Potiphar, had two children, Ephraim and Manasseh. And they were the sort of parents of two Israelite tribes. The same is true of Judah and Tamar, etc. There was a lot of intermarriage in that area, and people were apart. Uriah the Hittite, one of David's generals, he was a Hittite, he was a Canaanite. Okay, and we have a number of others who were this. And so the people in that region were always a hodgepodge, some of them who joined Israel, etc. But Judaism, what became later known as Judaism, is a religion. Religion of Israel is a religion. And there are people from all different ethnicities who basically formed Israel. And so what we have then, we have a similar situation to what took place here in continental America. And so we have people from Europe basically coming to a territory, claiming ownership over that territory, saying to people who lived on this territory, okay, you're going to go down this trail of terrorism and you're all going to settle in Oklahoma, and some of you out in Dakotas can stay in Dakotas and this, that, and other. You're going to live where we tell you to live, but we own this place. And yeah, we know that's supposed to be a sacred land, but we want to put a pipeline through there. And we don't care that it's your sacred land. We're going to put a pipeline through there. And as we see what's taking place in that region, even the areas that were assigned by the United Nations to Palestine, if you look over the years, they're shrinking. And even as we speak, there are Jewish settlers who say, okay, we want part of the West Bank. And they're building communities there. And yes, the United Nations is saying something, and America's pretending to say something. Okay, but this is basically displacement, genocide. Any other person doing it, any other nation doing it, we're going to say, hey.
It feels like in the past month or so, things have obviously ramped up. I don't understand the beginning of what's happening right now with the bombing in Gaza, with the kids dying, with the hospitals being bombed. So how did we get to this point?
Okay, so on, was it October the 7th? I forget the date in October when you're away. Hamas, which is one of the governments of Palestine, there were two governments there. So one of the governments of Palestine in Gaza. And of course, we have the West Bank, also another government. So one of the governments decided that they were going to, just destroy a kibbutz, right? And they wreaked some havoc. They wreaked some serious havoc, killed a whole bunch of people, took some into captivity, and so there are still some hostages that they have now. All right. And this is how Israel decided to respond. Now, Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, made a statement, when he said, listen, he's calling for peace on both sides, calling for calm. And then he says, remember, this did not happen in a vacuum. Israel went ballistic. Israel went ballistic because, especially under Benjamin Netanyahu, the current one, ultra-Zionist. And, he wants to push this myth that, we've been here for thousands of years. Not true at all. Not true at all. But he's pushing this myth. And the Secretary General of the United Nations is saying we need to get to the root of the problem. Because if we look before Hamas did what they did, which was terrible, was atrocious, before they did what they did, the Israeli Defense Force has mowed down hundreds, some people say about 1.2 thousand people just this year before that thing. Before that terrible event, there have been hundreds of Palestinians just being mowed down by the Israeli Defense Force, and crickets from the United States, crickets from everyone, right? And so what you see here, Martin Luther King says, violence is the language of the oppressed. You push them to a certain point. In fact, and speak on the very Palestinian cause, Nelson Mandela. And this is Nelson Mandela post-release from Robben Island, post-presidency, the first democratically elected president of Zambia. Okay, you notice I didn't say South Africa. First democratically elected president, right? He basically said, these were his words over him, is based upon his experience as head in the ANC, because the ANC, they were termed terrorists by the United States because they had their guerrilla warfare and different things, fighting against their oppressors, fighting for their freedom. And Nelson Mandela said, if we don't find a solution to this, then there's going to be justifiable violent resistance. Nelson Mandela, because he understands the pain of living under someone else's hand. Again, I'm not, advocating or endorsing what happened, but I do understand why it happened. Because these are people who have been oppressed and continue to be oppressed, And of course, there are some people who, when they look at the makeup of Israel, they say, okay, when we look at the Israeli population, okay, because remember, but the Israeli population is primarily Jews, but then there are also Arabs. So there are Israeli Arabs also, okay? But the majority are Jews because, of course, they want a Jewish state. They are, by law, a Jewish state. Okay, so they're a state that's based on discrimination because they are a Jewish state, right? So we have this Jewish state, and some may say, well, when we look at the makeup of Jews in that area, they're not only, I'm going to use the term and I'm going to break it down, they're not only Ashkenazi. Now, what does that mean? So there were different types of Jews based upon where they're from. So an Ashkenazi Jew is from Europe. And from a genetic perspective, okay, because the Talmud says that you trace Jews' heritage through their mother. So from a genetic perspective, they basically originated mostly from Eastern Europe. Okay, that's where the genes take you. That's where the evidence takes you, right? And then you have the Sephardic Jews, and Sephardic means from Spain. All right. And so we have southern Spain, Portugal, but also other areas of North Africa, Libya and other things. And so Muammar Gaddafi, the late leader of Libya, okay, they call him brother leader Gaddafi, his mother, he was a pain in the side for the United States of America. His mother was a Jew. Okay, a lot of people in his family were Jews, even though he was a very strong Muslim. Okay, because there were a lot of Jews who lived in that region. To this day, there's a very strong Jewish community in Iran. Okay, and so a lot of people say, well, if you look at the makeup of Jews in Israel, over 50% are either Mizrahi and Sephardic. Okay, I buy that. All right. Now, it doesn't mean that they're actually from there, but they're coming from different places. And again, there's a whole other narrative on that. But when we look at those who control things, that's what I'm saying. So I can't help but look for this through the lens of white supremacy. But when you look at those who control things, all right, there has been, I think, 14 prime ministers and 11 presidents since the formation of the state of Israel. It's a different system. It's a system here, right? And so we have, it's a presidential democracy. So, well, if you want to call it a democracy, because if everyone can't vote, it's not a democracy. And so we have 14 prime ministers, 11 presidents. I challenge anyone to look at the pedigree of those who have led Israel since 1948. Their parents are either from Ukraine, Russia. In fact, Benjamin Netanyahu spent many years here in the States, etc. These are Europeans. These are Europeans. There's only one president whose parents did not come from a European country, and they were Sephardic, which means that they came from somewhere else there too. All right, and so this is just a reality. This is just a reality. So when there was an article a couple years ago in the Los Angeles Times when the guy was saying, we need to stop saying that the Europeans, come on, man. I mean, anyone can research. It's easy for people to find an article to write something saying, oh no, there are more, I mean, during the height of British colonialism, yeah, there were more blacks in Jamaica than whites, but who run things? It's what I'm saying? Yeah. Right. And so there's that racial aspect.
So if people are seeking information, unbiased information, where would you recommend that they go to find it?
It's going to be very, very hard to get unbiased information, honestly, it is, because the sides are there, and any information I give, people probably say is biased. But I do strongly recommend a book by Michael Peled, P-E-L-E-D, and it's called The General's Son, The Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. His father was a general in the Israeli Defense Force. And he speaks in that book about growing up in a home that used to belong to Palestinians, and his mother feeling so bad about it. And now he's an advocate for the Palestinian cause. Right, because his father was one of those who led revolution. And oh my goodness, I'd even go into that over there, because even when you look at the state of Israel has what they call an Independence Day, and that's why I said there are so many parallels in the United States of America. Because who did they get their independence from? The British. Okay. And again, if you don't know the history, and so anyone just look at Google 1947, 1948 Jewish terrorists, and you read about the Jews who wanted, the power to basically govern everything for themselves, and you read about the hotels they were blowing up, the people that were being killed, and all kind of, this is the history that people don't know and people don't want to know. And they either look at it through the ignorance of saying, okay, these are the people in the Bible, they've always been there. Okay. Or look at it, well, God promised them that land. And even that question, if we really want to get theological, okay, particularly Christians saying that, all right, from a Christian perspective, all right, we believe that the New Jerusalem is what really matters, not the Old Jerusalem. Okay. And even from a Jewish perspective, the early Christians believed that they were Jews. Not believe that they were Jews, but they were ostracized by the powerful. And so Christians could say, well, we're Jews. If there's a right to the land, why don't we have a right also? Which, of course, was what the Crusades were all about. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. You gave us a lot to sit with. And you mentioned the book. But I'm going to push you a little bit more because, again, there are a lot of people that I've been having conversations with that are trying to find unbiased information.
Wow. Right? That's going to be hard. I mean, I mentioned before Palestine, Peace and Apartheid. That's Jimmy Carter's book. I mean, I personally believe that Michael Peled is unbiased. All right. But of course, that's because I have a bias. Right. And then there's Josh Nubna. Goodness, what's his book? His book is on Obama's missed opportunity. And so I forget the title, but his name is Josh Nubna, Neubner, I believe it is. Goodness. Okay, let me just say it like this, Shireen. What do you think about Cher?
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, Cher.
You can say Shireen.
Yeah. I would encourage your listeners to do the work.
Mm-hmm. So you say that, and I kind of hear it's like when someone asks you as a Black person, what should I do?
Yeah.
And there comes a point when you kind of just have to do homework by yourself
on
your own.
Yeah. I would encourage them to do the work, to look at the arguments for justification of, okay, why are we doing this? And you're going to find someone say, well, this is the land was given to our fathers. We own it. A lot of them have sort of a religious reason, which is strange because Israel is one of the most secular countries in the world.
What do you mean by that? Elaborate.
Okay. Let me not use the word secular as one of the highest percentages of atheists and agnostics. So let me not use the word secular because it's very religious in a sense. I've been in Israel, and on Sabbath, for instance, there are no shops, and Arabs can run their taxes and stuff, but the shops are closed and everything else. So but it's a very atheistic, agnostic country, but they use the Bible for good propaganda. When I say good propaganda, for their cause. And so a book I mentioned earlier, Shlomo Sands, The Invention of the Jewish People. And again, this is, if you really want to understand some things, I would recommend you read this, because these are books that are written by Jews. All right. Miko Peled, Josh Nuba, Shlomo Sands. These are books that are written by Jews. And he speaks about the educational system in Israel where Jewish kids, from the time they're young, they're studying the book of Judges and everything, the wars where they were going and, kill the women and children and animals and blah, blah, blah. And so their minds are being set, you need to go and kill the Philistines and kill the Canaanites. These people are, and so it's almost like they're looking at this as a repeat of the ancient story of Israel, and they have the right to this land. Okay. And again, I don't want to minimize at all the terrible atrocities that Jewish people have had to encounter in Europe and Africa and other places. But is this the way that you deal with the problem? Could there not have been another way? Do you deal with the problem by creating an apartheid system? And look what the United States is doing now. They're voting billions of dollars to continue the arm, and then they're giving a few million for humanitarian aid, so they can have their belly full when a hell fire missile kills them.
I think that's the other thing that a lot of people don't understand: the support that the United States has for Israel specifically.
Yeah, but I think again, it's a part of the collective guilt. It's a part of that, having that interest in that region, because America is always about its own interests. All right, so it's about having that interest in the region. Very strong, influential, Jews like Chuck Schumer and others over here, and so you have a number of reasons. Of course, you have the evangelicals. In fact, I wrote an article some time ago. Your audience should be able to find it online if they type in Jerusalem, a prophetic challenge. And I wrote it for Message magazine, and I basically look in there at the irony of what's taken place from a religious perspective, because you have these evangelicals who supported the move when Trump moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Doing that, he's recognizing Jerusalem as the capital, which the United Nations are no one recognizes that. And so the evangelicals are saying, yeah, Trump's that guy, man. Trump's that guy. Because the evangelicals, particularly those who are dispensationalists, believe that this has to happen and there has to be a big war so that Jesus can come. Right? The Muslims, particularly the Salafi Muslims, and not just Salafi Muslims, we look at Muslim eschatology, okay, their understanding of the end times. They also believe that this is going to be the center of the final war, all right, between the Dajjal and the Mahdi. This is the false Christ and the Mahdi. And then, of course, Jesus returns, because the Muslims believe in the second coming of Jesus too. Mm-hmm. So Jesus comes and he defeats everything and then ushers in a new age, right? Now, the Jews also believe that there's going to be this Gog-Magog battle, and, Israel is going to rise to its former glory. And we see the promise of Isaiah being, so it's interesting in that spot. You have these three religious groups, all of their own understanding of what's going to happen. And in the America, you have this strong evangelical lobby who are supporting Israel. The irony of it is that the evangelicals are supporting Israel because they want to see Israel destroyed so that Jesus can come. And so it's not like they're doing it because they love the Jewish people. All this pray for the peace of Israel and stuff. It's like, come on, man, we kind of want this to happen so that Jesus can come.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and that's kind of doing this. But I personally don't like the fact that the U.S. government, with the exception of Jimmy Carter, the presidents, all of them, including Obama, have kind of pushed this white supremacist agenda. And that's what I see with Joe Biden right now. The brown lives don't matter. The brown lives don't matter.
And I think that this is not even, I see it starting up a lot of conversations around other territories going through similar things that don't have the media attention that Israel has right now, like what's happening in the Congo and what's happening in
Niger.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's just really, I see a lot of people confused. I see a lot of people angry. I see a lot of people arguing. I see a lot of people kind of pushing the whole cancel culture of like, if you don't feel this specific way, then don't even have a conversation with me, which is why I want to have this conversation with you, because I think a lot of us don't understand what's happening one way or another.
Yeah. And sure, even with that, even with what you just said, everyone has a history. Okay. And so if you've been through the Holocaust, if you're a child of someone who's been through the Holocaust, you're just happy that there's somewhere that you can call home. And you're not thinking about, for the most part, what it took to get this home, that someone had to go through their own Holocaust for you to get this home. Right? You're not thinking about that. All right. And so, but that's part of your history. And so if I was to talk to someone from that background, I would understand where they're coming from. I would understand where they come from. But I think it's also important for a person, if they know the facts, if they know how the state of Israel was created, if they understand that those who control politics are basically European, if they understand that, I don't know anyone who can trace their roots back to Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, genealogically, and all the DNA tells us that they're from the place where they were from, and if you know all that, and you still decide that, okay, what's happening, Israel has a right to do this and blah 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 blah, then just acknowledge who you're siding with. Just acknowledge that if this were South Africa and the ANC, that you would be siding with de Klerk. Just acknowledge that if this were Winston Churchill and the Mau Mau, you're siding with Winston Churchill. I just threw something in there. But just acknowledge who you're siding with. That's all. That's all. Just acknowledge that. There were many people who, because of their acculturation, because of their upbringing, because of their theology, didn't see a problem with segregation. Right? Okay, acknowledge it. You think Black people are inferior? You think so? But just, okay, acknowledge it. Okay, I know where you're coming from. That's good. So acknowledge what it is you're embracing. You're embracing. Everyone has a right to embrace whatever, but just acknowledge what it is you're embracing.
Mm-hmm. All right, Dr. Burton. Okay. Thanks so much for having this conversation with me.
Thank you. This has been a solemn conversation, but
it has been. But I think it's important for people to have information. And I also wanted to try to approach it from a place of understanding the historical context, not this is my opinion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think you did that pretty well. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. And again, I encourage all of your listeners, all of your viewers, please do the work. Please do the work. This is not simple. Don't listen to sound bites. Don't listen to CNN, MSNBC, and don't listen to the twisted news on any of them. Fox, especially not Fox. You know, I mean, don't listen to that stuff. Do your own work. Look at the facts. The facts are out there. The facts are discoverable. They're not hidden. They're not hidden. And whatever decision you want to come up after that, that's you. At least it's an informed decision that's not distorted by the twist, by the media. So if you're one who says, and I actually had a student who, when I was covering this in class some years ago, said they have the right to do it because they have the bigger guns and so and so and so and da da da. And so I asked a student, it was a black student, at an HBCU. So I asked him about, okay, what did he feel about what the Europeans did to the First Nations here? And he said, well, you know, they had a right to do it. And so I said, okay, so I know who you are. I know who you are. I don't understand that way of thinking. Well, actually, I do understand that way of thinking. I don't agree with that way of thinking because to me, it's supremacist thinking. And a person may not want to embrace the supremacist label. But if that's who you are, hey, that's who you are.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for listening in or watching this episode of The Ignorance Project. I hope you leave feeling enlightened. And I'm going to add, if you have any questions, reach out to us, let us know. I'll offer you up to.
No, I can tell you have to pay me for these things because, I mean, you offered me up like this, you know. Yeah, I mean, this little conversation is going to be a nice little tax write-off for me, man. Maybe it's sending people my way. I'm going to have to go by the hour.
We'll talk about that later.
I'm only kidding. Anything for you. Anything for you. Now, I mean, of course, if you want to put me on your payroll, you know, hey.
We'll get there one day.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Peace, y'all.